This week, we're starting a brand new chapter, chapter 21. This will be a short chapter, and we'll wrap it up this week as well. This chapter is not as heavy on vocabulary as last chapter, but we are still studying geometry, which means we're going to have some special key terms that are going to be most of our math practice. Today, we're going to be talking about Chapter 21, Lesson 1, Congruent Figures. Please open up your math journals and your textbooks. Open up your textbooks to page 547 and get your math journals labeled 21.1 Congruent Figures. You can take notes as I talk. Today's vocabulary is only one word, and it's the word congruent. Congruent means figures that have the same size and shape. In your textbook, there's this really nice chart that helps us see whether shapes are congruent or not. In order to be congruent, the shape and figure need to have the same size and shape, not one or the other, but both. We're going to talk about some of these figures and decide whether or not they're congruent based on that definition. I'm going to continue talking as you write down that definition. If you'd rather pause the video so then you can hear me fully, you can do that as well. Let's take a look at this first row. I see two line segments AB and line segment CD. Although they have different points, they're both the same size, the same length, the same shape. That means they are congruent. Even though they have different points on them, the line segments itself are the same size and the same shape. So those figures are congruent. Let's take a look at the second row. I see two circles. They're the same shape, but they're not the same size. These circles are not congruent because they are not the same size. Let's take a look at the third row. I see two right angles. Both rays coming off of the point appear to be the same length, which means that they are congruent angles. They're both the same size and the same shape. Their angle measurements are congruent because they both are 90 degrees, and the angles and rays themselves are also congruent because they're the same size. Let's take a look at the third row. I see two pentagons. They're the same color, which is cool. That doesn't have anything to do with whether they're congruent. They are the same shape. They're both regular polygons. All their sides are the same, but they're not the same as each other. One pentagon is much smaller than the other. Because they're not the same size, they are not congruent. Then we have the last row, these red, white, and blue soccer balls. They're both the same size. They're both the same shape. Regardless of their color, although the color is also the same, because they're the same size and shape, that means that they are congruent. So in this chart, these line segments, the 90-degree angles, and the soccer balls were congruent figures. I'm going to show you a couple of congruent figures, and we need to decide together whether these figures are going to be congruent or not congruent. Now, I want you to keep in mind, congruent figures need to be the same size, the same shape, but their orientation does not matter. The word orientation means which way the shape is flipped. If the shape is flipped a different way, that's okay. It just needs to be the same size and the same shape as another figure in order for them to be congruent. So I have these shapes here, and they're all flipped a little bit different. I'm going to try my best to rotate them and see if we can stack them on top of the other shape to see if we can tell if they're congruent. So I can tell looking from these shapes it appears that if any two were to be congruent, these two might be congruent and the other two might be congruent, but their orientation looks different, which can be a little bit confusing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually turn these figures all facing the same way so that their orientation is the same, so I can maybe see if they are congruent. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to stack this one right on top of the other one that it appears to be the same shape to see if it's the same size. So do you see if I stack that up there, it lines up perfectly. That means that these two figures are the same size and the same shape as each other. Let's see about the next one. They appear to be the same shape. Both have the same jagged lines, a square bottom and a V-neck top. Let's see if they are exactly the same. If I line them up, they line up perfectly. That means that these figures are the same size and the same shape, which means they are congruent. So keep that in mind. Just because a shape might be turned one direction or another, that's okay. It just matters if they're the same size and shape in order for it to be congruent. Let's start our practice together. This is coming from your textbook from page 548. We're going to tell whether the two figures are congruent or not congruent. Looking at number 1, I see two triangles, and they're not in the same orientation, but that's okay. I see that they are, but they both appear to be right angles. And looking at the dot paper, I can tell they're 1, 2, 3, 4 dots wide. 1, 2, 3, 4 dots wide. 1, 2, 3, 4 dots up. And 1, 2, 3, 4 dots across. So I know that these are, although they're not the same orientation, each side of the triangle is the same all the way around. So these are congruent. They're the same size and the same shape. Let's take a look at number 2. Number 2, I see two boxes that are in an L shape. Now, they are definitely the same shape. Let's see if they're the same size though by counting the dots. So it looks like one of them is bigger. Let's see. The first one is 1, 2, 3, 4 dots across. The second one is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 dots across. So my theory was right. This one is definitely longer. Because they are different sizes, they are not congruent. Let's take a look at number 3. All right, number 3, it looks like we have two shapes that are the same shape, which is great. I'm not doing a fantastic picture, but I'm doing my best. Looking at the dots, let's see if they're the same length. So I'm going to measure the two sides that are the same and see if they're the same length. So I'm going to count the dots to do that. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 dots across that way. Let's see if it's the same on the other shape. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They are. Let me see the other sides, make sure they all measure the same. 1, 2, 3 on the sides. 1, 2, 3 on that side. Perfect. And on the other side, it's 2 diagonal down. So yes, these are the same size and the same shape. So that means they are congruent. Number 4. All right, these ones are not drawn out on dot paper, so I can't measure them, but I can tell right away, although those leaves are the same shape, they are definitely not the same size. So that means they are not congruent. All right, looking at number 5, the snowflakes. They're both snowflakes. They're kind of about the same size, but they are definitely not the same shape. So that means they are not congruent. And looking at number 6, the starfish. All right, looking at those starfish, it does look like they are the same size, and it looks like they're possibly the same shape. It looks like if I turned this starfish around a little bit, that this side would match this side. It does look like they are the same shape. So because they're the same size and shape, that means that they are congruent. All right, for number 7 through 8, we're going to use these dot pictures above. So it's going to be important that we count the dots when we're able to. That will help us make sure we are being accurate. Number 7 asks, which pairs of polygons are congruent? So we have polygon A, B, C, D, and E. So I see that it appears that A is the same as C, but let's count the dots and make sure. I see on A there's 3 dots across, and on C it's also 3 dots across on the matching side. I see 1 dot down diagonal on both A and C, and then it's matching on the other side. So A and C are congruent. And it appears that possibly B and E. Let's take a look at their dots. So I see on the longest side, it's for B, 1, 2, 3, 4 dots across. And on E, the longest side is also 1, 2, 3, 4. Opposite side is just 2 dots on B, same with E. These shapes are congruent. So A and C are congruent, and, A and C, and B and E. All right, number 8. Number 8 says, which pairs of polygons are not congruent? Well, there's quite a few pairs that are not congruent. A and B are not, B and C, C and D, D and E. There's lots of different combinations. Rather than writing all of those out, let's just explain that to be congruent, oops, so sorry, my friends. To be congruent, figures need to be the same size and shape. All right, let's take a look at number 9, and then we'll get you started on your independent practice. Number 9 says, explain whether the statement, all circles are congruent, is true or false. You may include a drawing in your explanation. So let's think back to circles, and we actually saw this at the very beginning of the chapter. Do you remember the chart I showed you with the 2 circles? They were the same shape, but are they the same size? They are not. To be congruent, figures need to be the same size and the same shape. So circles are all the same size, or are all the same shape. But can be different sizes. So that statement is false. Then in our example, let's draw a small circle and a medium-sized circle. Same shape, different sizes. All right, so I hope that today's lesson is a little bit of a break for you. I know last chapter had so much vocabulary. This lesson here, you only are working with one vocabulary word, congruent. You're going to do lesson 21.1 PW. You're going to solve all of them. And you are going to need to remember that to be congruent, they need to be the same size and shape. So make sure you check that. At the end of this video, you can pause the video so that you can have the answer key ready to check your work when you're done. Please don't look at this part while you're solving your work because that defeats the purpose. So make sure you're practicing. And if you have any questions, make sure to send them to me over Class Dojo, or I will see you for Zoom on Wednesday. Thanks for all your hard work and keep up the good work.